Okay, good morning, everyone, and
Good morning.
welcome to the second day of the Trinidad and Tobago IGF 2021. And thank you to Ajmal for his recap of yesterday's event and a bit of explanation and reminder of what the TTMAG and TTIGF is all about and where things fit in. Um, this morning, my name is Vejai Sammy, and I have the honor of being the moderator for the first session this morning, or first panel session this morning, uh, Tech and Education, and we'll be looking at revolutionizing education for a digital world. And following on from discussions yesterday, I think this is a very timely topic. And again, we have assembled a very experienced and very knowledgeable panel, which I am sure will lead to some very good and rigorous discussions and input from their presentations. Before I get to that, let me just set the stage uh, of the topic and why I think it's very timely in our discussions. We have noticed that there have been many changes to our life, the way we do business, um, from the time of the pandemic early in 2020, around March. And we saw some significant changes in the way things are happening in terms of the services um, and the way it has affected both public sector and private sector. We have seen this drive towards digitalization. It is, I would think, no longer a buzzword, but it is it's something that we have seen being put into action out of necessity because we understand the restrictions being imposed because of the uh, pandemic. But life has to go on, and we need to have businesses go on, and we need to have services go on. And we see that happening in the public sector, where we're seeing a lot more of the uh, government services trying to come online and be made available remotely. We've also seen organizations moving to work from home, remote working, and on the business side, we've seen organizations finally start to implement e-services and e-commerce as part of their offerings in order to maintain their service to their customers. And it's caused tremendous shifts in the way we do things too. On the education side, we've seen a lot of organizations have to quickly move their operations to online and get e-learning going. So it's somehow kind of given a jump start or kickstart to, I would say, a kind of mini gig economy in Trinidad and Tobago. And we're seeing some signs of it progressing. Uh, Companies are saying that they are looking at not returning to a full pre-pandemic stage, so they would continue with their kind of hybrid working situation. And on the business side, we're seeing a lot of change and commitment to going towards the e-commerce and e-services side of things. In fact, just yesterday in the news, there was a announcement by a major retailer in Trinidad and Tobago that they would be shuttering two additional stores. And the reason given was not just because of the pandemic, but they said they were closing good stores to create greater shopping experience. And they were going to look at collaborating with other retailers and marketing uh, uh, organizations in order to bring to the local market a e-service or e-shopping experience that would be far better than what existed before. So, in that note, we should be looking at and asking ourselves, are we preparing people to be able to function in this? And I'm hoping it's a continuation and continue to grow, a growing gig economy or e-commerce economy or digitalized economy. And that is something we are here to discuss this morning with our panel of some, experts, I would say. And I would just also want to mention, before I introduce the first speaker, following on a comment that came in from the first session yesterday, after the first session. And the comment was made that critical thinking and innovation needed to push TNT through to the digital transformation age. And I repeat the first one, critical thinking. Critical, it's needed for the innovation aspect, right? And this is something that we would be looking at as we ask the question about revolutionizing the education system in Trinidad and Tobago for a digital world. So with that being said, let me just introduce our first speaker this morning, who will surely set the tone for the discussion going forward. And she's no stranger to any of us here, and to many of us in the I.C.T or the education sector. She is Miss Jacqueline Morris. And Jacqueline is an experienced tertiary educator, researcher, educational technologist, and instructional designer, whose focus is on the intersection of the internet and learning. She currently is the e-learning manager at the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. During her many years of service as a teacher educator at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, she taught students in the fields of education, technology, and instructional design at the Center for Education Programs. She has also lectured at the University of Trinidad and Tobago in process engineering, at the UE in management information systems and technology and tourism. Her current research interests focus on online learning strategies, processes, and the psychology of online teaching and learning. She can also get her hands dirty with regard to creating online content, having also worked for multimedia productions and live video projection firms. She is also a certified Moodle educator and a certified Microsoft Innovative Educator. In 2003, she was appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations to a global panel of experts on internet governance. Since then, she has been active in the fields of internet governance and I.C.T policy and has held several positions in international policy organizations such as the ICANN. She is currently the policy chair for the nonprofit constituency at ICANN and the vice chair of the local chapter of the Internet Society. She was also recently voted in as director of the TTMAG and currently sits as a director on the board of the National I.C.T Company of Trinidad and Tobago, also known as IGOT. So without much further ado, I will hand over to Jacqueline to take us through our presentation this morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone in this area, and for those of our friends from around the world, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. I'm going to be a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but I hope you'll bear with me. Because one of the most fundamental parts of building a society is how we educate our people and our citizens. And this panel talks about a revolution in education, and that is a conversation that I think is long overdue. I was trained first as an engineer, so I think process, I think design. And the first thing that I look at when I look at a system like the system of education that we have is how it was designed. Why was it designed? What was it designed for? What was it designed to produce? Who designed it? What were the assumptions that were made? What was the environment in which it was developed? And when I'm looking at the system and whether it is fit for purpose now, we need to go back and look at the history. It helps us understand why certain decisions were made. And then we investigate the assumptions that were underlying those decisions. And we can see if those assumptions still stand today, or if we need to make changes in the light of our current environment. And then we can determine what parts, if any, are fit for purpose now, and what needs to be changed, and how we need to change them. So I'm going to go into a little bit of history, something like 1,000 years of history in 2 minutes. The education system that is the foundation of the one that we have now started around 1100 in Europe. And that was the religious education system. The primary purpose was training clergy. Free education was mandated in about 1179. All of this at the time was the Roman Catholic Church, because there was no other in the Western world. Education there was mainly for two things: in Latin for the clergy, because everything was in Latin, there was no work in the vernacular, and training singers for the cathedral choirs. Those were the main jobs. And it went through. We had the building of the apprentice system and so on, but really nothing much changed until the 1800s. And that is when we had the Industrial Revolution had come through, and that was when people said, you know what, we've got to start instituting mandatory education for all. And why? A quote from one of the researchers who's been dealing with this said that the goals were to produce more soldiers and more obedient citizens. Parents were required to send their children to school, and the minimum standard was set as schooling from 5 years old to 11. At 11, they were given a certificate for attaining the educational standard, and then they went off to work. And that kind of held for the next 60 or 70 years. And then, but the system grew. So there were church schools and some public schools that were built, that were organized by, say, towns and villages and so forth. In England in 1944, the Butler Act codified the split between primary and secondary education at age 11. It also managed to bring the church schools fully into partnership with the state. And they did this in two ways. They had controlled schools. These were schools that were church schools that agreed to be funded totally by the state and to set themselves under the local education authority. And that's a governmental educational authority. And then we had aided schools, which kept more control over their curriculum, their staffing, the students that they accepted, and so forth. And they had some of their costs paid by the state, but not all. That sounds a little familiar. And I'll kind of stop there, because right after that came that's a system that we had, and then we became independent, and we continued having that system. Since then, we've tweaked it. We raised the age for school leaving to 14 and then to 16. We went with a school leaving certificate, that certificate of educational standard that came out in the 1800s. We changed it from SEA. We went from 11 plus to common entrance to SEA. Other tweaks, we've decided to localize our curriculum. So we stopped using Oxford and Cambridge as our examination boards, and we have our own CXC. We've included vernacular in our schools, and we have implemented every technology that has come along into the education system. But the system that we have now, today, in 2021, is effectively the system that was created in the 1600s. But a lot of things have changed. For example, we don't have jobs for life anymore. We don't need obedient citizens. And so when we look at the system itself, when I look at all the push to put technology into the school, that hasn't really changed much in the outcomes of the system of learning that we have. It seems to me that it's a donkey cart and we're blinging it out, we're adding all sorts of technology onto the cart, but it's still a donkey cart and it's not really going to be fit for purpose to drive us down the highway. And that is what I think that dealing with technology in education without looking at the foundations of the education system will bring us to. And now I want to look at some of the assumptions that underlie the system, the assumptions that came from the history. The agrarian calendar. For most of the period of time that this education system was developed, it was a rural system. So it was an agrarian calendar. Children, as everyone, they needed to get the harvest in quickly. The harvest came from June to September. I'll just leave that right there. Industrial child labor. Children were allowed to go to work at 11. So the end of compulsory education was set at 11. That secondary school was optional for those who could afford and who didn't have to go to work. So where we are, primary school ends at 11, secondary school starts after that, even though we now have mandatory secondary school. Subject-based teaching. Schools started with just teaching Latin. It expanded with the printing press and the Reformation, which allowed the Bible to be read in English or in the vernacular, wherever you were. English focused sometimes. And other subjects were added as they became formalized. When chemistry became an area of study, it was added. So these things were just slapped on with no consideration for integrating them. The goals of education were to produce workers for industry, civil service, soldiers and obedient citizens, clergy. And our government-assisted schools, we have the Concordat, and that is pretty much based on the Butler Act of 1944. When we look at what we supposedly want for our nation, if we look at Vision 2030, the plan that is informing the government moves right now, the vision of education says, quote, an education system that encourages entrepreneurship and innovation and prepares learners to take advantage of opportunities in a rapidly changing global environment. It also says that it is integral that research and development as well as innovation be promoted and institutionalized as part of the pedagogy across the education system, pre-primary, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the long-term goal, 2030, which is not quite so long-term anymore, being in 2021, that's 9 years from now, our population will be diversely educated, innovative, and entrepreneurial. So we need to start thinking, what would an education system that is fit for these purposes look like? We can't just think of the strategies and the content and the technology and so on. We need to think about, what does the system look like from the ground up? The important terms that I like people to remember about what we would need in our education system: research, innovation, accessible education for all, diversity, entrepreneurship in a system of rapid change. And this is a place we need to start in order to revolutionize education and not continue down the road of blinging out the donkey cart and saying, yes, we will function like a BMW, because that's just not going to happen. Not without proper bottom roots up change, revolutionizing it, in other words. Thanks.
Unmute Vejai.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline, and for setting the stage for us. Um, the issue of revolutionizing the education system for the digital world that we are living in. It's a very complex issue, and it is not simply, as you said, just simply a matter of throwing technology at it. What we have seen happening since the pandemic, we've seen schools and educational institutions shifting to an online format. And that really is not revolutionizing so much the system, because at the end of the day, we have to look at what the education system produces. So it's the end result that what we have to look at. And as you quite rightly said, right, we are still creating the same type of individuals from a system that has been in place for decades, and it may not be suited going forward in a environment where you need to have this type of ability to adapt quickly, update, change your skill sets, and also, as you said, to be able to be innovative in your thinking and in your actions. So I think that's a very good introduction to the discussion, and it lends a very good segue in for the next panelist. And he is also someone who has a significant amount of experience and in the education field and in the technology field. So let me introduce our next panelist, and he is Pandit Shiva Maharaj, and I think many of us may also be familiar with him. He is a graduate. He graduated as part of the first cohort with a Master of Arts in Leadership in Technical Vocational Education and Training and Workforce Development from the University of the West Indies, after attaining a Bachelor's of Education degree from the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He has accumulated numerous international industry-based qualifications and certifications in telecommunications, information technology, computer studies, digital citizenship education, and end-user cybersecurity from global institutes. Over 2 decades, his experience in educational technology was highlighted in a two-page article published in the Ministry of Education, Educare magazine, volume 1.2. He was recognized for his innovative and pioneering achievements in the deployment of educational technology solutions in primary and secondary schools throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Additionally, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, he has recently commissioned his own branded device called the Digital Guru Class Tab PC, which is an optimized, out-of-the-box, complete online education solution system for students, especially those living in rural areas. At the tertiary level, he imparts his knowledge to other educators as an instructor for the Internet Technology Development course and a Master's in Educational Technology program at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Pandit Maharaj advocates on the website digitalguru.tips for mobile literacy, digital citizenship, and end-user cybersecurity competencies through his association with industry leaders in those respective fields. Outside of Trinidad and Tobago, Pandit Maharaj and his company I.C.T Expertz Limited is known for heading the Trinidad and Tobago Safer Internet Day Committee and champions for National Cyber Security Awareness Month and Data Privacy Day, which was, I think we observed that yesterday. He has presented papers and presentations at a number of international conferences hosted by universities, government, and other prestigious institutes on topics such as human capital, the weakest link in cybersecurity, the digital future of Ramila, the use of technology to develop Mandaras in Trinidad and Tobago, and the silent disco classroom. I think something you may want to look for and take a read. Sounds very interesting. So I would like to now hand over to Pandit Maharaj and take us further on in our discussions on this topic.
Good morning, Vijay, and to everyone who are part of our forum this morning as we discuss education and technology. In my discussions with Vijay yesterday, we highlighted the fact that we actually met many, many years ago when I did one of my projects at a school with innovations of technology in education. So, to begin my bits for the discussion this morning of technology and education. I would not go as far back as 1,000 years as Miss Morris, but I would like to go back at least 100 years as we look at how the revolution took place. And I go back to 1915, where the University of Chicago Press published a book by educational reformer and by one known as John Dewey, and anyone in education will know that name. In his book, School and Society. And John Dewey, who was that 20th century educational reformer, he criticized schools for simply teaching lessons. And that's one thing that to note, right? He criticized 100 years ago schools for simply teaching lessons, quote unquote. And he advocated methods of teaching and learning must be adapted to the changing societal situation that is applicable to life and the real world. Quote John Dewey, 1915. So that's 100 years ago where we had educational reformers thinking in that way. And I am glad that Miss Morris brought up, the revolutions and the industrial revolutions, because if we look at society today, we are presently in what is known as the fourth industrial revolution. And what the fourth industrial revolution enabled, it was enabled by technologies that are based on computing and the internet. And so we had the Internet of Things, and we had all these grand ideas of the inclusion of technologies and internet technologies in schools during this period. And signs of the signs of the fifth industrial revolution is actually upon us with COVID-19 pandemic. So technology must first be defined, and so we must understand that the application of scientific knowledge for practical purpose is a definition of technology. And technology has always been in the classroom, and we can't. Some people, when we talk technology, we think only digital technologies, but technology has always been a part the um, of the landscape of the education system. And so we can, if we go back in time, we can see from that of the feather pen where we had to dip in ink was something that was used and that was a technology. And we had blackboards, whiteboards. Now we have interactive boards, right? And now we even have with the online platforms, we have things like Jamboard, which are interactive online boards. So the evolution and the revolution continues to happen. We had, back in the day, stone tablets. Then we had the slates that we used in our school system. Then we had even tablet chairs in 1960 was included into schools. That was part of the education system technologies used in educational technology. And of course, today we have the electronic tablets. So COVID-19, the United Nations made a reference to, and to quote, they said, COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education system in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners and more in 190 countries, right? And so that's a quote from the United Nations. And what is interesting, the World Economic Forum published a research-based report that suggested that online learning facilitates increased retention and information in less time, and therefore COVID-19 may have changed education forever and will remain an integrated part of the educational landscape. And that's from the World Economic Forum. And all these are very recent quotes for 2020. All right. However, that drastic necessary jump onto online education has exposed many gaps in 21st century competencies. And this is where my focus has been, and I've been actually going to focus my PhD research in that area of competencies. Because if we are going to look at, and as Ms. Morris rightfully said too, we have to look at what we want in society. 100 years ago, John Dewey said, education system must match that of what society requires. And if we are looking at digitalization, therefore, the competencies for a digital citizen should also be included in the education system. And so this is where my focus is on that, and we'll continue to discuss as we go along. So I'm specifically now looking at what are the competencies that are needed for a digital citizen. And we have to ask the questions, where do we start teaching these competencies? And what are those competencies that we would like to have? And I think that could be enough for us to carry on with our discussion this morning. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Maharaj, for your opening presentation and remarks. Uh, I think that was a very good introduction into leading on from Ms. Morris. And as you rightly mentioned, technology has always been around, it has always been involved in education. So, but the pandemic has just thrown light onto the need to adapt and to change the way in which education is being provided. What the pandemic has also done is highlighted, even put in even more, put the spotlight on the inequalities for students. When you bring students to a school, you can sort of level the playing field, but when you have them outside, that's when you start to see the differences and challenges that every student faces. And we've also always said that technology can be an not just an enabler, but it can be a leveler. It can provide, and it should provide. And I think this is one of the things that the global IGF looks at, is to look at things like technologies, particularly internet, as more a resource that is human right, rather than something that is only for those who can afford it, or, and I would say lucky enough to have it. So I like your discussion so far. It really put the light on the issue at hand, which is not necessarily, as you said, we have to bring in computers, we have to bring in the devices, we have to bring in these things, we have to move it online. I think that's more of a facilitation, but it's facilitating a current way of educating. And if you look at exactly what you said, that the online system seems to have a greater impact in terms of getting material to students and allowing them to digest it, better, and to recall it, or even to make use of it. And I see that. When I look at even my son, who is, has to switch to the online platform, and he has actually preferred the online way of doing things. And that brings to us, as you said, you have to uh, prepare students to be able to work in a different manner. And our next speaker is going to highlight some of these challenges and some of the things that he has noticed also, being an educator, right? And we spoke about it, this switch from having a synchronous to an asynchronous delivery method. And tying back to what Ms. Morris was leading on to, it, we have to look at a system that is more creates a more engaging environment for students, allows them to develop their ability to become critical thinkers in the end result. Because that is, I think, one of the things we're trying to produce more of. And we've seen that in the changes that were being introduced in the C examination, where they were trying to go from, as you said, learn by rote, right, and regurgitate, right, to being able to think critically and to come up with your own ideas and to come up with your own solutions. Right. So let's move on, and we're going to get some further insight into this from our next panelist, Gosine. And similar to many of us here, he is a TTMAG director and civil society representative from the Rotary Club. Dev holds a BSc in pure physics and applied physics from the University of the West Indies. He has held the following offices in Rotary: president for 2 terms, assistant governor, and district secretary of Rotary District 7030. He is part of the district training team with the responsibility for training Rotary presidents and assistant governors for their terms in office. He is very involved in amateur radio and all modes of digital communication. Very active in the orbital satellite carrying amateur radio, also known as OSCAR, and has built satellite tracking systems to track the polar orbiting satellites, including the space shuttles, and CAT systems to correct transceivers, receiving and transmitting frequencies for Doppler shift. In the course of these activities, he has had several historic voice contacts with astronauts on board several space shuttle missions, along with his students from Naparima College. He is also engaged in low power, and when you say low power, it's less than 10 watts, point-to-point high frequency worldwide digital communication, coupled with remote station operation. Currently, he serves as secretary of Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society and is the vice principal of Naparima College, San Fernando. So I hand it over to Dev to take us through the next session. Next question.
Good morning, Vejai, and all our viewers and listeners. Welcome to IGF, our fifth IGF of the Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. It's interesting, and I'm so glad that the two speakers, which I don't know if you're psychic or what, but I'm so glad that both Jacqueline and Panelists Shiva laid the foundation for what we're about to look at. And that's really excellent. I'm glad that they did, and they really give the perspective. I think they looked at why it is we need to be doing what we're doing in this topic on technology and education, revolutionizing education for a digital world. Now, first thing I want to point out that, and this topic actually starts off very similar to day one, because this digital transformation, this revolution in education, is another case for multi-stakeholderism. And I should mention that we should not adopt a blame game policy. We can't blame somebody if it's not working right. Educators need to take ownership and be the change they would want to realize in this whole transformation process. And what I would like to look at, after we've delved into the history and the why, is what are some of the elements, and it's not an exhaustive list, it's things that we need to consider. Something like change management of the stakeholders. And like I said, it's a multi-stakeholder approach to this revolutionization of the digital education. It's the first thing I want to look at is change management, like I said, of all the stakeholders, and more so the educators, because we have to be part of this change management process. And any change management process, we have to manage our emotions, and which would include, we start off at the start on May 13th, when we realize that these things are happening. We start off with things like, denial and anger. We wanted to negotiate whether we should do asynchronous or synchronous classes. And then when we realized we had to do certain things, we move into a state of depression. And then eventually by September, we realized that we need to revise our plans. Some of us decide to desert the whole thing, abandon ship, but most of us stuck around and accepted our new roles. We also need to look at things like infrastructure development for both staff and students. You know, devices, availability of devices, what do we use? Connectivity issues, do we have the appropriate bandwidth? Is it available? You know, sometimes even as educators, we see students dropping off of our classes. And it's a simple case of, for example, where they are located in the home in relation to their routers and so on. Also, we need to look at setting up proper learning management systems, whether it is, you know, owned by the teacher or by the institution and that sort of stuff. We need to look at, you know, professional development for the staff. So it's a whole approach in terms of how we go about managing or implementing this revolution in digital education. Again, virtual environment will include things like connectivity, our learning management systems, what we use, assessments. You know, there was a school that I interacted with, and the principal was saying that, you know, everybody in the school had gotten A's last term. Okay, so these are some of the things that we need to manage in our institutions. Probably in instituting things like authentic assessments, you know. And of course, even from an administrative point of view, we need to evaluate and we need to set up metrics within the institution where we'll be able to monitor and measure things. And are we doing things right? Are we being effective? So I guess I gave Jacqueline some of our stuff because I was looking at the clock and I decided not to give the full length of my opening salvo so that we could get on and engage discussion there. So what I want to say is that after we do all of this and we evaluate, we need to go back to the start and go through the process because it's a continuous cycle. It's not going to happen in one round. It's going to be a continuous cycle of evolution. Back to you, Vejai.
He's muted.
Thank you, Dev. Very, very nice contribution to the discussion at hand. We raised a lot of points there in terms of the effect of trying to change the education system. And what you're mentioning in there is the introduction. I mean, we've been speaking about it. The introduction of technology is a disruptor. And it does feel it can because as you said, it changes how the teachers have to approach education. It requires them to reskill, basically, and that can be uncomfortable. It requires a lot of time and effort. At the same time, as you said, you know, you have to deliver, right? Yes, you mentioned that you know, teacher gave class all A's, right? Because again, teachers have to be evaluated and they have to show that they're performing. So we are uncovering as we go along a lot of factors that have to be discussed and need to be considered when we are looking at this whole issue of revolutionizing education. And I think it's more, and even though the topic is for digital world, right? I think revolutionizing education on a whole, just for it to be more effective and to be more in line with what is happening in the world today, that alone is just a big step for us to take, a big step for the sector to take. So you mentioned that it was transformational, and Pandit Maharaj, give us some stats from the United Nations and indicated that the pandemic was one of the most influential events that has caused a major shift in education. But I think it's more, it's been a shift in how education is being delivered. Many countries are still struggling with trying to have their education systems operate under the restrictions of a pandemic. But it's still, it hasn't addressed, and some cases, yeah, it hasn't addressed the actual change in the fundamental way education is being, what education is doing, or the end result, what is being produced, right? So Jacqueline said, that is the key thing, because as the environment changes, as the world changes, our economies change, um, the individuals that we produce have to be able to take advantage of it, have to be able to become productive and to contribute to their economies and to the world at large. And that requires a whole different mindset. So uh, I think it's a good topic to now getting to, and this is transformational, right? And our next speaker, Mr. Felipe Noguera, uh, he is an expert in this area. So I'm thankful that we have him on the panel. So let me just give you his introduction. Felipe Noguera, he's an accomplished multilingual executive with extensive international experience in media, corporate communications, telecommunications, education, business administration, human rights advocacy, community organization, and international trade. Felipe successfully managed large Caribbean private telecom companies and trade associations, and was a central figure and lead negotiator in multiple international trade negotiations and symposia for the World Trade Organization, the European Union, Commonwealth Heads of Government, and Summit of the Americas. Felipe has extensive experience as a communication specialist, television news anchor, documentary producer, and radio host, maximizing the transformational impact of technology by researching and implementing best practices for attracting, developing, and retaining great talent to sustain implementation. He is an effective team leader and player and current director of the Virtual Educate Academy. So we'd like to welcome Felipe to take us on to the next section of our, and he's driving, so I hope we have a good connection.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here to address such a, I would say, an existential topic with respect to our people, to humanity, and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. I appreciate all of the speakers who addressed this topic before me, in particular the historical context provided by Sister Jacqueline Morris, with whom I've collaborated over the years, and for whom I hold tremendous respect. I think the first thing I'd like to ask is how we define revolutionary in terms of education, especially in the current context. We've looked at historically, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, pre and post-colonial, but in the current COVID-19 pandemic, how are we defining revolutionary? And Mr. Chairman, you mentioned how we deliver education. That is one aspect, the form, the means of communication to deliver curriculum. But the other, and vitally important, is the content itself of the curriculum. But let me ask a few questions so we can have ample time for discussion. Although digitization is a new norm globally, relatively new, and I'll just say that in 2006, I was the Chief Communications Officer for Miami Public Schools, which controls WLRN radio. The Federal Communications Commission wanted us to digitize, and it was going to cost $10 million to do so. The mayor and even school board members thought that this was an exorbitant cost that they couldn't afford. And they were prepared to give it to the mayor and others. And I said, "Are you crazy?" I told the superintendent that he had an invisible resource of tremendous value. And it took me 9 months. I had to hire a Jewish lawyer to tell people things that I couldn't say, that they wouldn't listen to me saying. And this is part of form of delivery of message and content. And we finally convinced at a meeting of the school board where they cut $200 million in learning, they passed the $10 million budget to digitize. The very next month, Mr. Chairman, we were able to lease bandwidth to Clearwire to do WiMAX at $300 million through digital compression. So how you use your delivery is very important. And the fact that, however, there have been vested interests in Trinidad and Tobago that have wanted to delay digitization for the very cost of it, whether it's CNMG or other institutions which have that responsibility. It is an exorbitant cost, and there are lobbies that have been entrenched against it. Now, while this has delayed our competitiveness economically, it has also given us an opportunity to do what we're doing now, which is to reflect and think critically. As one of the speakers said, critical thinking is vital if we are going to decide which way we're going to go forward. And I want to say that because I've just returned from the United States, where I was teaching in a classroom. I've taught at the university level. I was teaching Cuban students to speak English. There is an Erythrium board, or whatever they call it, Prometheus board, that's what it was, and a big electronic eye in the classroom that monitors everything that goes on. And you are supposed to teach to the packets and the curriculum that they offer. But what happens when there's no bandwidth? What happens when the internet goes down? Teachers are not learning how to teach without the aid of artificial intelligence. And this is a dangerous trend that we need to avoid when we plan the implementation of digitization of our education. I further, after I left the high school, and I could tell you a funny story about the Cubans, but that's another one, who, by the way, have done a very interesting job in revolutionizing education in response to the conditions of economic embargo and sanction. However, that takes me a bit off topic. The question is how this opportunity to reflect on the implications of digitization, including digital IDs, vaccines, and it gives us an opportunity to revive the popular democratic institution that once was very prominent in Trinidad and Tobago of national consultations, town hall meetings that will enable us to shift the paradigm of economic determinism and allow people's critical thinking to make decisions for how we move forward in a digital world. My next question is, how do the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and singularity, which is where you have computers not reporting to people, but informing people what to do, impact upon learning? And I've seen a number of comments in the chat room, because learning is critical. The sage on the stage, the teachers. The second thing that I did when I was when I left the classroom, I went to California to do a review for the government of California of how learning is taking place and how equity can occur, because you have in a place called Oxnard, maybe about less than an hour from Los Angeles, you have students, the majority of whom are Central American, Mexican, Native American, suffering. Their results are not optimal, and that's another issue. How do we measure effectiveness of teaching and learning? Is it just through tests? So that means that teachers end up just teaching for and to the test rather than teaching holistically, so that students can be encouraged to be creative, innovative, entrepreneurial, and think critically. We have not had that era yet, Jackie, I don't think, in history, where we have encouraged entrepreneurship education. We've encouraged industrial education, but the information age hasn't produced that pedagogy, in my opinion, yet. So on learning and cultivation of human values, organic human intelligence, conducing to revolutionary education in a digital world. And my final question is how to apply technology to cultivate virtue, human values, and the mark of an educated person in a digital world. And I'll close by saying, so since the COVID broke out, I was unemployed, and suddenly my children started saying, listen, our kids need help, they need education, can you teach them? And I began something called, you can go on www.virtualeducareacademy.com. And we started, and we have students in New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Trinidad and Tobago, Ireland, and even New Zealand. And the amazing thing about this is we're teaching children ages 1 to 15. And they are amazingly in one class. So we start with silent sitting. We think about something like work is worship and duty is God. What does that mean? Or you know, hands that help are holier than lips that pray. And then we'll sing a song, start the day with love. We'll integrate that with Qigong or yoga, which then breaks the monotony, because remember, these kids have been online all day in class. Who explain to a 15-year-old the word of the phrase, hands that help are holier than lips that pray. Then we go into student presentations. Now, so far for the last 6 months, we were doing student presentations on prominent individuals who are worthy of emulation and study. And I could name so many of them, but you're educated, you know the types of people I'm talking about, exemplars. Now we're working on two very interesting projects. One is global warming. So they're looking at, and I have them working in teams in different locations, family members and strangers working together. And they're looking at things like, why is it getting colder and there's more snow when when the polarized caps are melting? What are the effects of light pollution and what can be done about it? And with each, how do coastal communities and islands are affected by rising sea levels?
Yes,
And okay, I'm going to stop. But you get the idea. That the idea is integrating and getting students to lead the learning process using the technology as a tool rather than as a determinant. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Felipe. And I like that you have been speaking a lot about, changing the way in which students approach education and what you're trying to get out of them, and that critical thinking, because that seems to be a common thread across the discussions coming across this morning. In fact, looking at there was a article in the Washington Post recently, and they were looking at, again, post COVID, what does education mean for children, given the significant amount of transformation happening in the world because of COVID. And they indicate, they were saying that education should prepare young people for life, work, and citizenship. And I know Pandit Maharaj has very strong views and a lot of to say about the preparation of a person to be a part of a digital society, what we may want to call a netizen, right? And they go on to say that knowledge is of natural engineered environments and how people live in the world is critical to all three purposes of education: critical thinking, creativity, interpersonal skills, and a sense of social responsibility all influence success in life, work, and citizenship. So it is not just about education. I'd say education is not just about the traditional way of thinking of, you go to school, you study, you get a degree, and the purpose of the degree is to get a job, and the purpose of a job is to earn so that you could buy a house, a car, and have children, and so on, right? It's more than that. You have to, purpose of education, to develop individuals so that they can contribute to society. So I would, if we are looking at creating that type of individual who is going to contribute to a even more digitalized society, and digitalizing society, what do we need to do, and what should we be looking at in the context of our education system? I'll just throw that out to the panel if anyone wants to comment on this.
Yeah, so I can take it, Vijay.
Okay.
Just as we spoke on the competencies, and I use the word competencies and not skills because it's very important for us to understand that if we're looking at a digital competent or competent digital citizens, we have to be looking at certain things make someone competent, and that's knowledge, skills, and attitude. So what we see in our society is that we have young students, and I know a lot of the chat is speaking about the teachers and so on, and we know, yes, the educators have been thrown into this as well, and many of them are not competent in delivering or using technology. So if we look at, if you tell someone, many people, and I see this from kids to adults, you tell them, go to the address bar in your browser. They watch you like, what is the address bar? And for us, that may seem silly, but it is a reality. And that's where the knowledge comes in, where they have to have the knowledge as to what the technical jargon and terms are, right? Then you have the skills, which most children have. They could swipe and so on, right? Because they're using these touch technologies with the tablets and so on and phones, but put them in front of a laptop or a keyboard. Keyboarding skills are not there. Mousing skills are not there. And the thing is, we are looking as to go towards even digital evaluation and assessment for fully, and the children don't even have these skills. And then lastly, of course, my main focus is the attitude. And I like the last presentation and speaking about, doing things in the morals and values and the ethics and those aspects of it. Those things come in with the digital citizenship and the digital literacy that is needed. And the question that I posed when I began is, where do we start? And the thing is that most of these curriculums that already exist, they start from a very young age and preschool, right? Because this is where you need to have these ideas on the moral and ethics and skills being developed for the ideal digital citizen. So this is where my area of focus is, and this is my contribution for that question. And I leave it open now for the other panelists as well.
Great. Thank you, Pandit Maharaj. Again, would they hear from the other panelists?
Vijay, could you just repeat that question?
Okay, so I was asking exactly if we are looking at developing individuals who can contribute to the changing economy and to be part of this world, right? What do we need to be looking at in terms of transforming our education system?
And that is not a simple answer, because you need to go back to exactly what I was saying. What is fit for purpose? Do we know what we need? We have not discussed what does that new citizen look like. We can say, oh yeah, we can do this, we can do that, but all of that is still bringing out the donkey cart. We need to say, what does this person look like? And then we say, how do they function? In what environment do they function? And then we break it down to what do we need? What do they need to know? How do they need to function? What kinds of interactions will they need to do? And then we can say, right, we've got to teach. We've got to have students who come out with true collaborative work. We need students who have empathy. We need students who are curious. And then we say, okay, so how can we teach these things? How can we create a system in which students learn these things? How can we make sure that instead of learning it on a superficial level, that they truly come out embodying these things? And one of the things that Felipe was talking about that I think is really important is collaboration. We have a system that is very individualistic. People learn you start talking to a classmate when you have something to do, and the teacher is like, no, you have to do the work by yourself. And you're like, but when you think about it, nobody actually in this world does anything by themselves. Innovation has never occurred by anybody sitting down by themselves in isolation and coming up with anything useful, new, novel, and so on. Everybody works in teams. You bounce ideas off of each other. Collaboration gives us how would you call it? A spiral to better. And a lot of what a lot of the ways that the conversation works is, okay, let's do this. And we do we slap something on. And we can't do that until we start looking deeper. We can't simply say, right, so we're going to take these students and we're going to slap them in groups and they're going to work on group projects, because they don't know how to work on group projects. We need to start them understanding that, one, from very young, respect for other people, respect for differences and diversity. The number of students that I had in UTT, and we slap them into a group and say, do a group project, and the amount of people who hit us with, oh, I don't want to be in that group because that person's stupid and they will bring down my GPA. If we evaluate people individually and we do not give marks, for example, for working in teams, then they won't bother with it. So the assessment has to change. The way we introduce things has to change. And we need to start really early. We need to start building those skills. How these people are going to, how these students, how these people are going to come up being able to work in a certain way. We've got to start that in pre-primary. We've got to see, actually children do that in pre-primary. They work together, they play together, they find something and they work with another one and they build a tower together and so on. And that's fine. And then we get into primary school and everybody's got their own separate mark and they fight for first in class and so on. And if they don't get high enough in class, if they don't come first or second or third in class, their parent might punish them, beat them, whatever. And we form that competitiveness instead of the collaboration that we need. And collaboration and respect is one of the things that we need to have a society, because if people are all individualistic, then we don't care about each other, and then we don't have a society. So I don't think that we can just flap anything on. Go ahead, Felipe.
Okay, but I would just want to, when we get them to work on projects, we teach them to work on projects. Obviously, they don't know anything about project management or organization, but what, for instance, the girls who are looking at this, why is it getting colder in spite of global warming? They came initially with some superficial stuff, and the other children said, go back and do more research, because obviously that is not the answer. Start looking at the Gulf Stream, start looking at how so in other words, the collaboration takes place among the learners and the teachers who are also learners. So I'm learning. I never knew about light pollution before they suggested it. The question of the teacher, though, is as a facilitator of organization of learning. But then there's the question of collaboration. And the only thing I disagree with what you said, Jacqueline, is that while I'm proponent of cooperation and collaboration and learning, a certain level of competitiveness in the process is also healthy, so that they can strive for excellence, not cutthroat competitiveness, but competitiveness to help each other to excel. When it starts to get a little bit too negative, well, you intervene and say, come on, let's be supportive of one another. But they naturally come forward with things that help them to push. I think what we should be doing is trying to document and share these experiences with each other, and then take them, for example, to the CXC, which still doesn't teach properly African and Caribbean history, which is vital to helping to understand what this region is and who we are, regardless of where our ancestors came from, because so much of the colonial education that is not just the form of education, but even the content of education persists.
I want to be the devil's advocate here and say, look at an approach or a view that, following on Jacqueline, a lot of the training and all these skills, and I would say human characteristics that you acquire happens when you're at the young age, at the primary school level. And there's the thinking that this is what preparing persons, individuals to enter this digitalized economy or digitalized world, increasing digitalized world, is a matter of introducing technology earlier on For example, teaching coding and primary school level, the skills that Pandit Maharaj spoke about, so that they are comfortable with the technology, and it becomes, as nowadays, comfortable as writing with pen on paper, and so on. And that it just be a more technology-focused curricula, right? And that is what would lead us to having the individuals that will then be able to work in this digital economy. Anyone wants to take? I'm just, as I say, I'm just being a devil advocate. That seems to be, and I'm taking it from the context that when we talk about revolutionizing education, it's always about put technology in, give the students laptops, give them tablets.
Okay, Vijay, one thing that came up yesterday was when we do regulations, they are out of date in 5 years. And it's going to be the same thing with traditional technology education, as opposed to technology in education. This is education in technology. Things change. It makes absolutely no sense to teach someone. I mean, I did training many, many years ago, corporate training, and I'm back doing it again. One of the things that you find is that a lot of the times you teach someone how to use this program or this tool. And then 2 versions down, they don't know how, they come back for training. So they learned, say, Word 2016. When Word 2020 comes out, they're back to learn it because they didn't learn, they learned how to use the tool. And a lot of what happens when we teach children technology is that we teach them a programming language. We don't teach them the concepts of coding and the fact that you can learn any language. We teach students, click here, click there, use this, etc. But we don't teach them what a word processor is and how it works in general. If you know how these things work in general, then you can easily learn and teach yourself quickly how to use the new version. But we need to have technology education that is not about specific technologies. Because then you'll have people, inertia is a huge thing. You'll have people continue to use the tools that they know in the way that they know how to use them. When they get a new tool, they will continue to use the new tool in the way that they learned how to use the old tool. And they won't look for new ways, new things. The tool can do new things. Ooh, I can use this to do something else again. And that's the problem. We need to take away the specificity of technology, both in developing regulations, which is what the EU started doing, and start thinking about the values and the ideas that we want promulgated and not the specifics of technology. You don't want to get caught up in whether it's AI, whether it's this or whether it's that, but more, how do we use technology? What does technology do for us? And how is it easy for us to continually learn as things change so very quickly?
Right, if you don't mind, Vijay, I'll take off from here because Jacqueline raised some very interesting points, and I'll give you a little experience. I try to stay away from the experience thing, but nevertheless, I'll give some. My Rotary Club, for example, was requested to provide some devices and so on. I'll do a little fast forward on this. And being an educator and involved in this, what we decide to do instead is, and Jacqueline is correct, what we decide to do instead is rather than give devices, we decided to do professional development for the staff. And we did about 10 schools so far, from about October to now. And what we have found is that while we know that certain stuff is out there, like for example, Google Classroom, whatever teachers use, they have no idea. They need somebody to introduce them to it, to give them that aha moment. Oh, this is what it's used for. Things like formative assessments, or even summative assessments, self-market assessments. So we need to, getting back to what we need to do is to look at teachers and try to get them to feel comfortable with the solutions that they are going to use. And once they feel comfortable with these solutions, it will redound to the benefit of the students. That's the first point. The other thing is that, when you ask the question, what must we do, to improve the student, to prepare the student for this digital learning? We should ask ourselves, what do we do when we meet a situation that we were not trained for? We went to school for decades, and there are some things, for example, my phone fell in a puddle of water. How did I fix it? What did I do? And that level of curiosity, I think both speakers, both Pandit and Jacqueline and Felipe had also mentioned this. We need to infuse a passion of curiosity or a passion of learning, and more so teach them the ways, while we were probably, we experienced the sage on the stage, we need to develop, among the students, and I think all the speakers targeted it, they spoke about it, collaborative learning. They need to identify sources. You'll be surprised to know how many students have problems Googling, okay? And even finding something on YouTube. For example, if, one way of, and I see in the chat, somebody was talking about Bloom's taxonomy. And this is an interesting assessment. If, for example, I want to teach something on, say, some concept like Newton's second law of motion, or maybe collisions, conservation of momentum, you can ask students to go on YouTube and find one video less than 5 minutes long, which you think best explains collisions or some concept, whatever concept it is. It doesn't have to be physics. Now, what you actually do it, they will just send you one URL. What you've actually done is look at somebody higher order thinking skills, evaluation being among the top. So that student would understand a topic. You see, sometimes we as educators figure we have to be that sage on the stage all the time. But we need to appreciate the fact that we could guide students into creating and providing opportunities for their individualistic learning. When we do that and students practice that, then I think we are approaching this area of, or I should say in mathematics, this asymptote that we'd like to meet, we'd like to arrive at.
Thank you, Dev. Very good intervention there. And I think we have a question from the audience. Another Dev has his hand up.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, everyone. Good morning. Very interesting panel discussion. I have a question coming in from the YouTube chat. And the question is from Rishi Ramlal. And his question is, are assessments really reliable when done online? And he goes on to say that we are faced with assessment problems as teachers, for example, end of last term, when a lot of children got A's when they did online assessments at home. Are these results or those online tests valid? That's the question from.
I would like to comment on that. Okay, thanks, Jacqueline. All right. Well, this brings up a very, very interesting point. Number one, it has to do with school policies, okay? And, all this targeting some of the things that we need to address while we go digital, fully digital, or to create that digital student. Number one, how does school policy address this? And I'll give you my own personal experience. I have heard, in interacting with some of these schools in the training program, parents, I mean the feedback from these schools were, now these are primary school, that they actually hear the parents in the background, coaching the students and so on, okay? So how do I address it? Well, and this is my personal, this is Dev Gosine personal strategy, okay? Let me put a disclaimer on anything. Mr. Ramlal, this is what Dev Gosine does. Number one, you have a front-facing camera. Number two, you have a side camera over your keyboard. And number three, your microphone is on. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Yeah, there are a couple of ways to do it. Dev, as you said, there's ways to put cameras and try to manage the system. We can have this proctoring. Proctorio is a thing where you can get live proctors watching and listening to the student all the time. But the first thing I would say is to start by writing good assessments. When you do what people call Googleable assessments, you're checking, yet again, hit that Bloom's taxonomy. There is absolutely no way that students can Google answers to questions or have parents easily answer questions for them if you don't ask things that are fact-based that they can look up. Develop assessments that test the way the student applies the information. Develop assessments that require the student to synthesize information that they have learned over the period of time and create something new. Create assessments that require actual work from the student, actual thinking from the student. You can even ask the student to explain that thinking. And if you do have a parent working with them, if you've done enough work with that student, you can tell if it's the student voice or the parent voice. And that's one thing. I know part of the thing is that it is extremely difficult. It is very, very easy to get some definitions and facts and put multiple choice and boom, 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 and let the computer mark it. It's really easy to do that, but that does not help the student to learn. It doesn't help the application. It doesn't help you assess in a very authentic manner. That is the way the student is going to use what they've learned. Those multiple choice checking for facts doesn't help that, and it's really easy for students to cheat on them. So if you move to a more authentic way of assessing, then you lose a lot of the ability of people to cheat. And then, of course, you can add security. You can have a lockdown browser so that when they're on that machine, they can't Google something on that machine. You use the camera to see if they're using their phone. You use the microphone to hear if they're being quoted by someone. You can rotate the question so that every student doesn't have the same question and the answers are in different order. Shuffle the answers so that when they say, if they're in contact with someone else and they say, oh, the answer to question 3 is B, their question 3 is different from my question 3, and my B is different from their B. So you'll get it wrong if you do that. That sort of thing. There are many ways that you can manage this, but the best way is to do really good, authentic assessment. I know it's hard, I know it's a lot of work, but it's the best way to do it.
Thank you, Jacqueline, because what you is, you've talked about changing what is being assessed. As you said, you're not assessing things that are Googleable, right? And if we're doing that, we're looking at trying to have assessments that require more critical thinking, individual thinking from the students. So I am just putting it out there. Perhaps that is something that is being revolutionized in the education. If we go that way, if we continue to have to provide classes online, that the educators will realize that they have to switch to this type of format to be able to have very good and true assessments of students' competencies and capabilities. So perhaps it's being driven that way. And
Just one comment, Vijay. I think Dev T's hand is up again.
yes, I was just going to get the Dev T. You going to go with your question?
Unmute, Dev. Dev, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. Yes, sorry about that. My question in the chat was from Suzanne Andrews. How do we develop the individual? How do we then train the individual to fit into society, collaborative environments, and multi-stakeholder systems?
Perhaps we can get Pandit Maharaj to weigh in on this one.
Yeah, so that's why we were saying that we have to look at the digital citizenship. Now, my area of study for my PhD is looking at. I'm very inspired by our honorable Prime Minister in looking at. He always mentions citizenship. But I want to take that a little bit further in looking at not just a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, because there are so many other factors that that make a true citizen, a good citizen. And we have to look at digital citizenship and in terms of how someone is a good citizen online, and as well as a global citizen, because we are also not the global playing field has opened in so many fields, and we have to even add those things into. And so that's why I'm doing my research actually right now, to identify areas that make someone the ideal citizen, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but also as a digital citizen and a global citizen as well. And so the research continues. I actually only now started in that field to identify those things. But for some studies that have already gone on in the Harvard School of Education, Dr. Howard Gardner has identified some of these areas already. And so I will stem my research from that and take it more into a local context as to what is needed in Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, there are things you could look up, things like Project Zero by the Harvard School of Education, and they have already identified some of these competencies that we need to have to be an ideal digital citizen, and by extension, a good citizen.
Okay, thank you, Pandit Maharaj. Is there anyone from the panel who wants to chime in on this?
Okay, well, this whole thing of citizenship, first, to keep pounding on this, we have to define what we want in a citizen first. And once we do that, we can say, okay, this is what we want in a citizen. These are the attributes and the characteristics, and then we can start thinking, how do we create that? But until we know what we're looking for, we don't know how to set up a system for them to learn it. And this is something that keeps happening in Trinidad, not just Trinidad, in Caribbean and in some other places in the world as well. We need to say, what do we want first? Not what do we want to teach, but what do we want to see as a product of this learning? Yeah. It's backward design. You need to find out what you want at the end and then work back to see what you need to do to create that. And we keep starting at the wrong end.
Thank you, Jacqueline. As we are nearing the end of our session this morning, I'd like to hear from the panel. What are your thoughts on what would you like to see going forward in the context of the changes to our education system here in order to prepare students for the world ahead? it may not be perfect, it may not be happen right away, but what do you think we need to see happen? And I'll start with our last presenter, Felipe, if he can come in. I know he's mobile, so we may have lost him. Okay, so let's try Dev G. Would you like to weigh in on that?
Well, actually, I think my opening salvo actually answered that question. In terms of what I would like to see. The thing about it is that we need to definitely have change management. I shouldn't say a well-managed change by the educators, by our administrators, by all the stakeholders, as a matter of fact, all the stakeholders in terms of what is required. We need to have a good understanding of an appreciation of the infrastructure that is required. Provision. I mean, if we want to, some countries, they don't say education for all. They went a step further. I think it was at New Zealand looking at success for all. Okay. So what about those people in Blanchy shares who don't have internet connectivity? How are we going to level the playing field? So these are so this is why we're talking about not just educators, but many of the stakeholders. For example, the providers of the bandwidth for these students. So it's basically it's a major shakeup. Everybody should have equity in access. Okay, that's another thing. Of course, a robust professional development program for parents. And don't think that parents is excluded or are excluded from this whole transformational process. I'll give you an example. While you teach in a class, okay, I mean, I have had experiences where I see the student is missing, and then when I actually join the class, I call home, and the mother is telling me, well, they just send the son down in the grocery to pick up something for her, okay? And this whole process, this whole thing about, education, about what really is involved in an online program. Parents should have respect that this is school in progress. The child is not available to go make a grocery run or go to the mall to pick up something for you. So it's education all around. Using the systems that are available for the student and the make the education happen, whether it be a learning management system, whether it be whatever application you're using. As Jacqueline said, we need to understand the concept behind using these things. So you might be comfortable using Google Classroom. And then suddenly your school decided that they want to look at Microsoft Teams. And then later down the line, you realize that maybe you could use something like Educare. And then later down the line, you want to change. But there is a common thread that runs through all of these learning management systems. And that is what we need to understand. And rather than resisting the change that is going to happen. Of course, there must be continuous professional development in the whole process. And most importantly, I shouldn't say most importantly, another critical factor is the metrics, because we need to assess what we're doing, how we're doing it, and not to be critical, but really to find opportunities for development and growth. Because it is not a one-shot panacea that will say, okay, people, by April, maybe I should say by April 1st, we will have it down pat, because that will be the perfect all fool's joke, okay? So we need to move forward and say, something, this is an ongoing process. It requires continuous development and more discussions of this nature to have the wheels of revolutionization taking place. Thank you.
Devji. Through to Pandit Maharaj, 2 minutes, if you can just give us
Sure. No problem. So when to summarize what I've been saying right through is that we need to, and I agree with Ms. Morris, that we need to re-engineer from what we want at the end. And when we look at digital citizenship, We also need to look at, as I said, citizenship and integrity. As we mentioned, the assessment is one of the main things in a good citizen. And when it comes to those assessments, even the parents is a big part of it. And in our digital citizenship programs that we have run through I.C.T Expertz, we look at it holistically, including the parents and the student and the school. We have programs, we have stuff that integrate all of them, because all of them have to be on board into what is required to be a good citizen. And you will realize I didn't give any, as Ms. Morris said, we have to know first what are those qualities that we want in that digital citizen. And so that's why I'm saying that I'm now doing the research into that, so that we'll know that. And when we know that, then we could put things in place to achieve that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Pandit Maharaj. We have a couple minutes, I think. I just want to check, is there a question, Deputy?
This is Evenand. No more questions.
No questions, okay. So as we kind of getting to the end of our session this morning, it may have started off, I think the topic, when you look at the topic on paper, revolutionizing education for digital world, education and tech, it may have seemed at first that this is going to be a technology talk. But we have to realize that education is not a technology issue. It is a human issue. And technology is but a facilitator. And it's probably, I think it's one of the areas where we have seen some of the biggest changes and impacts coming out of COVID, simply for the manner in which we had to change how education was happening in Trinidad and Tobago. But that is, we move into online in order to continue the education courses and programs. But I really and truly, and I think I was mentioned in my discussions with the panel, the one-on-one discussions, we have used the technology only to shift the delivery method. And what we have to see is if it is actually changing the whole concept of education and the impact it's making on our students. So I can say, and I would like to say from my own personal observations, that there is some change happening. And I think it's doing some bit to prepare our students today to operate in the world of the digital economy. But it's not going far enough, because as was made clear during the discussions, we still don't know what it is we want. Yeah.
And
so
I just,
can
if you don't mind,
say my quick wrap up? Since I got left out of the route.
Just 1 minute. I just want to make my own would last just about 30 seconds, if so long.
Oh, okay.
Just in closing up, Vejai and the rest of the group, I was reading an article and they were analyzing a lot of companies last year. Some folded, some flourished. And, we started off today's talk about creativity and critical thinking and so on. And when they analyzed some of these companies that flourished, there were two major factors that contributed towards their success. And these companies displayed both of them in significant proportions. And they are, number one, creativity, that's the ability to identify something. And secondly, agility. So creativity and agility are the two main things, especially in this COVID-19, and more so for any industry. I was talking to somebody else, and they said that goes for almost any industry. Creativity and agility is what will bring you success. All yours, Jacqueline.
I just wanted to say my quick wrap up, since I kind of got jumped over there. I said what we needed to do in the start, and what I would love to see coming out of this is that the Ministry of Education or some other major champion would start doing a multi-stakeholder activity to make to start doing those questions and investigating those things so that we know what we want, where we're going, and we can start looking instead of doing piecemeal curriculum change and this and that and get rid of the SA and replace it with SAB and whatever, that we start looking at the system properly, deeply, and make those changes. And it doesn't have to be all at once major revolution. They can do it in an evolutionary way. But at the end, if they look at it in the right way and they bring the correct stakeholders on board, because all the stakeholders need to participate, because, you know, if a parent don't like it, it drops off immediately. And we can get to the system of education that we need to create what we need to create the citizens that we want in 2100, because 2030 is right there. We need to start moving way forward now. And that's my...
Thank you, Jacqueline. Okay, so I think that brings us right up to time. And I would just want to say thank you to our panelists for taking the time out and for making such a great contribution and having such a discourse this morning, a very nice discourse on the topic. And I encourage everyone to please continue to stay on for the second session today. And of course, please visit the TTMAG site at mag.tt. Become involved in the business of the MAG and to see what we're about. And you know, you can contribute in that area also. So with that, I would just like to say thanks again to everyone, to DevT for taking those questions for us, for the panel. And I just want to wish everyone have a great day and stay safe.